Paul II about 4 years ago. And so this is just a reiteration of the empty mind theory.
Now, I wanted to trade one other thing, and that is with regard to the issue of people going to the masses of the Society of St. Pius X. One of the things I've come to realize a long time ago is that, our priests cannot be everywhere. And I believe in these times, due to the circumstances and situations in the church, it's not the same. I'm not saying that the Society of St. Pius X, they have an erroneous opinion. They do. But on the other hand, their priests are valid priests. They are dispensing the sacraments. And we're in circumstances people can't go anywhere else. I personally would not have a problem with someone going to them, such as in New Zealand, where, Father Dennis died, and there would be no way. And we go there once, maybe twice a year at best. And there is a canon 2261, that says that for any just cause, the faithful can petition the sacraments, even for someone who's excommunicated, as long as, especially if there's no one else to go to. And so I think that certainly applies today. Do I agree with their position? No. Would I be concerned about young children listening to a position, maybe getting confused? Yes. Parents have to use very great discretion in that realm. But this is where, some of the bishops, traditional bishops, disagree. There's some that believe that it's a mortal sin to go to the Society of St. Pius X for Mass. And I just wouldn't agree with that. And the reason why I wouldn't agree with it is that if you're saying that they're schismatic to that degree, then when these priests all of a sudden maybe see the light and come around, then you ought to give them the abjuration of error because they were schismatic. And like there's a Father Neville, now Bishop Neville, he was consecrated bishop by Bishop McKenna. Bishop Neville, he was from the Society of St. Pius X. He joined up with Bishop Sanborn. And I highly doubt Bishop Sanborn had him take an abjuration of error. And I don't think of any of the priests that have left Vatican II and become traditionalists now, doing the Latin Mass. They all wanted to be Catholic. They're all professing the faith. And, I'm not going to sit in judgment about why they didn't do it earlier or anything else like that. For everyone is God's grace and their cooperation with grace. And, who's to try to put themselves in God's position and say this way or that way? And a little bit in this matter, you can get into this. Yeah. You go to the Mass, right?
I do. I assisted at a Society of St. Pius X Mass. The reason this has come up, I've been presented with the question, which really directly asserts that my position's changed and I've become sort of more liberal since going to the SSPX Mass. The problem with that is a question of fact. The first Mass I ever went to in 1988 was an SSPX Mass, and then the Mass I went to until the late 90s was offered by a priest who thought that JP2 was Pope. That's Father Cummins. For a few years, we didn't go to that chapel because what actually happened was another priest came in to assist Father Cummins, and he got involved with the Archdiocese and then got a Novus Ordo ordained priest involved as well. So for a while there were actually three priests, two priests and one doubtful priest. And I've telephoned when that happened. I did the legwork and I telephoned Bishop McKenna and Father Sanborn, as he was then, and Bishop Dolan and various other people, and Father Collins, and asked them what their opinion was about this situation and what we should do. And none of them said, actually that's not right. I think Bishop or Father Sanborn, as he was, said, get out of there. And everybody else said, well, it'd be a better witness to the faith to not go there. So we didn't, and we used to fly priests in, and we got Mass probably once every 3 or 4 months. In a couple of years ago, the Redemptorists, when Father Cummins got ill, the Redemptorists from North Scotland there, the traditional Redemptorists, who are associated with the Society of St. Pius X, came in and in just an amazingly providential week, got hold of Father Cummins, explained to him why he had to get rid of this Novus Ordo associated priest, and basically just cleaned the place out and returned it to the state it had been in before. When we heard this, we once again consulted various priests and bishops and decided that we would go back to that chapel. And that chapel is now, the Redemptorists, after a few months, handed it over to the Society of St Pius X. So that's the story in a nutshell. Okay, so now the question that the bishop's already answered is, should we go to their masses? Obviously, he and I agree on that question, particularly where there's no alternative. The question of the position they hold is obviously a problem. The position they hold is erroneous. But where the bishop finished talking there was, he's not prepared to usurp God's place in passing judgment on people. And the other aspect of that is he's not prepared to usurp Rome's place in passing judgment on people. And this is really, in a very real sense, what this argument comes down to. The see is vacant. There are no authoritative judgments coming out of Rome. And we are all in the middle of a crisis that God has arranged is incredibly confusing, and it is very difficult for people to see their way clear. And many sedevacantists have not come to the position because they are fully learned in dogmatic theology and have understood all the implications of the crisis and have come to the best theological position. They've come to that position because they knew someone that was smarter than them and knew more than them, and they've followed them. That's what happened to me. Yeah? I was convinced by Patrick Henry Omlaw that the see was vacant, and I've learnt more about it since. But when I accepted that position, it wasn't as a result of 25 years of study. So we need to be humble and realise that what was handed to us on a plate in many cases hasn't been handed to other people on a plate. The other thing that's probably worth mentioning is I know personally, as a result of going to SSPX masses, I know personally several of their senior men. I know Father Peter Scott, and I like him. I know Father Black, Edward Black, who's the District Superior for Australia and New Zealand, and I like him. I know Father Violette, who's now the District Superior in Canada, and I like him, I should say. And I even had the opportunity to spend an hour and a half hammering Father Smidberger on the sedevacantist position in private. Now, that's not known, but that's what happened.
It is now.
It is now. Now, I had that opportunity because I'm a friend of the SSPX, because I don't condemn them, despite my very public sedevacantism. And it probably didn't do any good, but maybe it did. And I guess the point I want to make is that these men have objections to our position, which, if we knew more theology, we would see the weight of those objections. For example, the indefectibility of the local Church of Rome. The local Church of Rome cannot lose the faith. I think this is why, in other words, the indefectibility of the Church formally resides in the local Church of Rome, in the Roman diocese. Now, this, I think, is why the message of La Salette was forbidden to be published any further under St Pius X, because it states directly, Rome will lose the faith. Now, that doctrine or that message wasn't condemned. Very important we understand that. It was never condemned. But it was problematical. It was problematical because all the dogmatic theology manuals say that Rome can't lose the faith. The faith must always be maintained in Rome. Earlier this afternoon, we heard the bishop quoting dogmatic theology manuals which state that the faith has always been maintained, unsullied, in Rome. And his point was that these men that claim to be the authority of the church in Rome therefore can't be the authority of the church because their faith is sullied. And that is absolutely true. But the objection then comes in, where is the faith in Rome then? Yeah? Because if it's not in them, it still has to be in Rome. Now, I'm not saying that objection's not overcomable. We can overcome it by pointing out that as long as there are faithful in Rome who have the faith, they are the local Church of Rome. But that's not immediately obvious to someone who studied dogmatic theology in the seminary for many years and has come to think of those men as the Pope and think of that whole solution. And then they hear what we say and they go, well, hang on. This conflicts with X, Y, and Z. And I've only given you X. There is numerous other objections they have, which are really very interesting. And I wouldn't be a sedevacantist if I thought those objections were valid. But I also wouldn't be who I am, which I think is tolerant of their position, if I didn't see the weight of their objections. And this is why I think to say, well, you have to be a sedevacantist or you're not a Catholic, is a schismatic position. That is to enter into schism. That is to cut off communion with fellow Catholics. That's what I think.
Okay. Let me try to gather my thoughts here. I wasn't sure where we were going to end, so... No, my own thinking is, look at Dr. Droleskey. He's come a long way, and in fact, I want to be honest, I'll tell you right now, we had our priest meeting in July, and they're talking about having him come to the different parishes, and some of the priests are saying, he's not coming to my parish, because I don't know what he's going to say. We don't know who he is. We don't know what he's about, you know? I mean, we didn't. I mean, to some degree we knew, but whatever, there was a couple of whatever, concerns, etc., and... but I'm thinking he's heading in our direction, if he's not already there, and I want to hear what he has to say, and he's come a long way. And, to slam someone like that and to shut the door on him, to me, is not going to be conducive to our cause. And so, I mean, when he came to Omaha, there's no doubt in my mind. I told the priest, fine, I have no problem. Glad he came. I was glad he could talk to our students. He gave, 5 classes? Mm-hmm. And he talked to the people after Mass, and it was great. It was good. And so, but I mean, what was clear to all of us is not necessarily clear to a lot of other people. And it takes time. And that's where I think we have to be patient. I'm grateful to God that I had parents that were on the ball. I mean, my father pulled my older brother out of the seminary in 1967. My parents were fighting the priests for the changes in the church. We left the school, went to find something else. Early on, we're going to Latin Mass. I mean, I can't be grateful enough. And, the remarkable thing is that Patrick Omler, that's your father-in-law, he went to the same school my father did, the Christian Brothers down in Amarillo, Texas. My dad was a little older than him, but they went to the same school, I believe. And it's kind of an interesting thing that there must have been really good Catholic education there. But, there's others that have come over a period of time, and it doesn't come right away. That's one of the reasons why, some of the people might think that, why don't we refuse people who come to the Latin Mass for the first time? Why don't we refuse them communion? I don't, because, number one, they're coming to Mass. Number two, they're Catholic, and they profess the faith. They've been misled by what's happened in the church. But when they come to communion for the first time, I'm not going to deny them the sacraments. There's no way. It's morally impossible. It might be physically possible, but it might be morally extremely difficult to try to explain everything in 3 minutes before they enter that church before Mass. And this idea of calling people out of the church and saying, you can't go to communion, you've already all of a sudden clouded their judgment about what's going on here. When people come for the first time, they're enamored with the Mass. This is solemn. This is sacred. This is reverent. There's people that are actually pious here. They're quiet, and they're inspired by that, and you give them time to come to the realization of what's going on. But to try to think that they're going to understand this position in 3 or 4 minutes before they enter the church, to me, is extremely difficult.
Can I just add something?
Sure.
Sorry, I've lost my train there. Oh, yes. The natural tendency of the traditionalist mind is to sedevacantism. People don't realise that. The natural tendency of the traditionalist position is to sedevacantism. As Father Cicada likes to say, or is it Bishop Sanborn?
Yes, Father Cicada.
They're material sedevacantists, if you like, yes? Mm. They're all implicit sedevacantists out there. Anybody who's a traditionalist is not governed by that so-called Pope. Yeah? Because if you're governed by that Pope, he's appointed bishops, for dioceses, who have pastors in parishes, and that's where you go. If you're going to the Society of St Pius X, for example, but there's any number of other examples, not the Indel, that's different, but the traditionalists, the real traditionalists, have broken with Rome practically, even if they haven't yet got their heads to where they need to be in relation to that issue. Now, the reason I mention this is because what actually happens is, as they tend towards sedevacantism, they start to investigate it, and we scandalise them. Yeah? We scandalise them by or whatever. Yeah? So what we have to do is we have to be nicer sedevacantists. and I have to say that that the CMRI is the organisation which I think is generally regarded by traditionalists out there, including the FSSPX, as the nicest, the most charitable sedevacantists that there are. Yeah?
And I want to amplify some of those points. No one who has a modicum of common sense, who understands the importance of preserving tradition, can't see that conciliarism is irreconcilable with Catholicism. I mean, I saw that years ago. It's a difficult thing, ladies and gentlemen, to come to the conclusion, obviously, when you do your research and you pray and you pray and you pray, that indeed the sedevacantist position is correct. It takes time. For some of you, you've had that grace your entire lives, as I noted last evening. For others of us, it was more difficult. And a few months ago, I had a statement in the 4 Marks, and I wasn't ready at that time to declare myself. That's where my conscience was at that time. I didn't want to make an error. And I had to answer to God for what I was being asked. And I don't consider myself important at all, but I know that there are people who do read my articles, and I didn't want to mislead them. I was beginning my investigations. I had essentially convinced myself, but it was, over the course of the last few months, by spending time at St. Gertrude the Great in Cincinnati and by spending our time with His Excellency in Omaha, that we became absolutely convinced that it is, of course, the correct position. And all of the research I began earlier this year, I've been looking at Cum Ex Apostolatus Officio for a time. I said, well, this is interesting, isn't it? And indeed it is. And it's by grace and by the charity that's been shown to us. Indeed, John is very correct. The charity shown to us by Bishop Dolan, by Bishop Pivarunas, and to recognize that there are people who are Catholic and who have suffered for being Catholic in the midst of the secular world, who have been slackers in this regard, but who are grateful to have found shepherds, true shepherds of souls, to guide us home to heaven. And we're very grateful for that.
You know, I'd like to add to that. I think that it adds to your credibility, Doctor, that you didn't just jump with both feet into something. It would seem rash, but you thought it out. You plotted slowly, but methodically and thoroughly. I think that adds to the credibility that it wasn't some emotional reaction, but it was more of a, a well thought out thing. And you went by steps, you went by degrees, but it was thought out. And I think that adds to, where you're at now is that it wasn't an emotional reaction. The heck with the Novus Ordo. I'm sick of this stuff going on, and he can't be the Pope. It wasn't it was up here, a decision intellectually. Let me see here. This just a question, what we said about Antichrist. Father Mary Gabriel was talking about the book, The Church of Christ by Father Barry, and Father Cicada made a reference to it when he wrote in response to Christopher Ferrera's attack on sedevacantism. But do you remember what that quote was, Father, about? Can you give the gist of it? I'd like to add something to that. And I get the diocesan paper, and not just from Lincoln, but also from Omaha. And there was a long quote from it was the doctrine of the Congregation of the Doctrine of Faith, headed by Cardinal Ratzinger at the time. And he's talking about the Jewish reading of the Scriptures. And I'm sure some of you have seen it on the internet, whatever else. But what absolutely flabbergasted me was that at the very end, it says the Jewish expectations of the Messiah have not been in vain. We, like them, live in waiting. The only difference is that for us, he who will come will have the traits of that Jesus who already came. They're not. I read that about 2 or 3 times, and they're thinking, it was just unbelievable. Hey, the second coming is this Jesus coming, the same Jesus who was born in Bethlehem and died on the cross, the same Jesus who rose on the 3rd day. It's not going to be somebody else with the same traits. But here he says, he who will come will have the same traits of that Jesus who already came.
Yeah, I have said privately and also publicly that I think that he is paving the way in that direction. Unlike John Paul II, who was trained in that underground flying seminary in Poland during World War II. That's what it was called, because it went from place to place during the Nazi occupation in World War II. John Paul II never really had a good understanding of the Catholic faith. He was a modernist, but he never had a good understanding of the faith. Benedict knows the faith better than a lot of people. He hates it. He knows what the fathers teach, and he hates what they teach, which is why he must deconstruct them. And that is not of Christ, obviously. That is of the adversary. Now, he believes he's acting in all goodwill, which makes him even more dangerous. But one of the reasons I'm here is because you take a look at what he's written over the course of his entire priesthood, and there's been consistency. He has been consistently anti-Catholic his entire priesthood. And obviously it was clear that John Paul was problematic in many ways. But for me, looking at it, and I said, with Benedict, it's even clearer because he has a paper trail of thoroughly anti-Catholic writing, of beliefs. And there's no fudge room on that at all, which is why I did my long expose on principles of Catholic theology. He believes, as I'll talk more about on Monday for those of you who are staying, the synthesis of faith. Where in the world do we find in Catholic tradition a phrase, synthesis of faith?
It's a synthetic faith.
Yeah, exactly.
John has the quote from that book there.
Father Berry. So this was it was written in 1927, so between the wars. The prophecies of the apocalypse show that Satan will imitate the Church of Christ to deceive mankind. He will set up a Church of Satan in opposition to the Church of Christ. Antichrist will assume the role of Messiah. His prophet will act the part of Pope, and there will be imitations of the sacraments of the Church. Well, it's a complete description, isn't it?
And St. Nicholas of Flue, too, and Catherine Emmerich.
Well, one thing is you see this ecumenical activity throughout the world, and I remember watching a movie a long time ago called The Gods in the New Age. I'm sure some of you have seen that before, but at the very end, this man was talking about how this man will come, he will enamor everyone, and he will unite all religions, because all the religions are looking for somebody, and this man will answer every religion's aspirations.
Mm-hmm. And the other thing is that Antichrist will bring peace. Yeah? Sure, but a false peace, yeah. But you have to have war for someone to bring peace. So I think that's what this is why, when the bishop earlier referred to the fact that things are being set up now and they're coming rapidly to a head, these continual wars the neocons are creating out of nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. You just get that feeling that we're maybe now at the point where, there will be another one, there will be an invasion or some sort of conflict with Iran, for example, and then where will that go? One of these will spark something big. So, you can't bring peace if there's not war.
No, and the point Pope St. Pius X in his encyclical letter condemning the Sion or French movement, which is exactly conciliarism, August 15th, 1910, said, where is all this leading, this movement, this what he called promiscuous association of Catholics with non-Catholics in the belief they can build a better world interdenominationally rather than the Catholic city? Where is this leading, he said? To the one world church. Pope St. Pius X. 96 years ago now. It's all there. It's all there in the popes of tradition, which is all you have to do. I've been criticized on my website. I quote popes. Yes, I'm trying to quote the popes of tradition to explain the true set of vacantists are the conciliarists, because they act as though the See of Peter wasn't occupied prior to 1958. And nothing they have said matters.
I like that.
Here's the last question. I think we covered them all. Growing up in the Catholic school prior to Vatican II, I was told that the last pope would be named Peter, as was the first pope, and no other in between. Could it be that St. Peter is in heaven, is our pope today? No, the pope is the vicar of Christ, but the church is as visible as a visible society. You have to be able to see him. So it can't, just be somebody. And one other thing I was going to say is that I want to stress when that one priest was saying, well, if you don't have cardinal electors because of the situation, then there could be no pope in the future. And we gave those quotes about how if there's doubt about who the cardinals are or whatever, that it falls to the universal church. I want to stress that concept, universal church, because I think here in the Spokane area there's a Pius XIII. How many have heard of him, Pius XIII?
Yeah.
Have you met him before, Steve? Yeah,
Father Polfmacher.
Yeah. And there's one in Kansas, Michael the First.
Michael. And there's
Canada.
There's Pierre II in France. There's Pierre II, Peter II in France, and Gregory the 17th, I believe, is up in Canada somewhere.
And Benedict the 16th in Rome. There's nutty claimants in every city. No, he died. But is there a successor?
Yeah. I'm not sure what that.
Question here, please suggest 2 or 3 written resources for hesitant inquirers to begin to return to the fold. All right. Well, of course, there are different resources I highly recommend. And one of the things I did early on in my investigations earlier this year was go on the CMRI website. Excellent apologetics material. Also, traditionalmass.org, Bishop Dolan's website. Excellent material, apologetic. Bishop Dolan, Bishop Sanborn. Bishop Dolan, insofar as the saints, he gives sermons on the saints every day. It's amazing. We were there for a month. It's just a slice of heaven. Bishop Sanborn, a little different. His style is more acerbic. But again, if you read his articles, he wrote a piece earlier this year on the new ecclesiology, it was last year on the new ecclesiology, how what the conciliarists believe is that the church is somehow, the divine constitution of the church is defective, that the Catholic Church does not have in and of herself unity. She does not have the fullness of truth, as His Excellency noted in his remarks. And he said that when the conciliarists say that other churches have elements of truth, this is like saying you're boarding a plane and your pilot has elements of true pilot training. That's... Or you have elements of true bingo if you're playing bingo. These are excellent materials for people to look at, especially if they have access to the computer. And there's the 4 Marks now, which I think is doing a very fine job in this regard. So there are excellent materials out there. But I highly, in tumultuous times, the Father's Radecki. That's an excellent summary of what's going on right now.
Okay, I think that's everything, Father. You want to make an announcement here?